So the terms and conditions that we all click through, what would meaningful consent actually look like, and who should be responsible for making it happen? I am guilty of clicking through as well.
Yeah. All of us are, right? We don't really have a choice, I think. I think that's really the issue. Should I? Yeah, okay, good. Well, part of it is what, I've been thinking a lot about this because people do emphasize, well, you have consent, right? And I think part of what is wrong with the way we think about consent, just to build on your point, Monifa, is that we think about consent as you can't consent to something unless you know what's going to happen, right? I mean, that's the issue. Is like, do you know what's going to happen with the information that's being transmitted in the process of you downloading and using this particular app? And the truth is we don't, because as much as, if anyone wants to read the terms and conditions, which I don't advise you do because they're tens of thousands of words long typically, but also because you're going to be pretty frustrated because a lot of it depends on third parties, which are unnamed. And that is really one of the big regulatory loopholes that are out there, which is that there's no constraint or restraint on with whom companies share data with at this point. Or very little regulation, I should say. So I think one thing that makes consent really hard is not only do we have to consent because we want the app or we want to continue using to use social media, but also because we don't know what's going to happen. And I do think that that is a really important part of consenting is okay, I know what's going to happen, and right now, because of the way digital data work, we don't. Once they're created, they're just out there. They might have longer lives than we do.
Did you want to add, Stacey?
Yeah, sure. Just to add to that, not only is it long, but there's so much like legalese, they call it, like a lot of legal jargon, and it needs to be in plain, simple language that we can understand. And it's like these companies are intentionally making it so complex. And if you want to use this app, especially if you need it to access service, like your banking or to do some of the online shopping, like you're just going to click I accept because you don't want to have to navigate another barrier just to access something that's essential. And so that's where regulatory frameworks are essential to kind of force the hands of corporations to do the right things, because if it's about profits and bottom line, we can't rely on corporations to do the right things in the public interest. And that's why we need to have government to ensure the right checks and balances for the better interest of the public. And that is a very difficult dance, because I'm also in the world of government relations and lobbying, and we know that corporations are, lobbying to allow for these loopholes to make it easier for them to meet these bottom lines.
So I'll say that I read privacy policies in terms of services for fun, because I find them very fascinating. I do. I clearly have too much time on my hands. But I do enjoy reading them. And I agree with you. I think the challenge is how they're presented. I have seen terms of service, privacy notices, consent language done really well. And I have seen ones that clearly they set it out intentionally for you to have to hire a lawyer to interpret it for you and explain to you how your information is going to be used. Obviously, if all I'm trying to do is download an app, I'm not going to engage with a legal representative to explain it to me. So the onus ends up being on both the company as well as the individual, but I think the more of the burden rests with the organization to make sure that they're presenting it in a way that users can actually understand. Randomly, Bumble has a very good privacy policy. I came across that in my research. Like I said, I read these things for fun, but their privacy policy is presented amazingly. It's broken down with pictures and graphics and like really presented in a way that helps the user understand how their data is flowing through the entire journey.
Very good. And most of this is assuming that companies care to make any of this more easy for you, because the terms and conditions is kind of like a form of friction to getting past. So like seeing all the different AI tools that are available now, is there an opportunity to maybe use some of the AI tools to better understand the terms and conditions? I know this wasn't written down, but I have questions.
I mean, I think that's a good perspective, because people are now using AI to draft like a legal document, right? To better understand symptoms. Everybody's using AI for medical stuff now. It's like, oh, what does AI say? I got a headache. I got this. What can I take, right? It's becoming commonplace to help us understand things that were really knowledge reserved for the experts, right? Where you had to really wait to see your doctor before things were digitized, where we had easier access. So I think that's a good insight. We could probably use it to help us better understand it, but then we still have to be mindful of how AI can interpret things in maybe a biased way or also hallucinate, as we heard earlier, give inaccurate information. So you want to use it with caution. Always ask for the sources and the reference and double check those sources just to also make sure it's giving you the right information.
I would also still just say that that also then puts the onus on all of us all the time to do, I mean, I love your hobby of reading these terms and conditions, but I don't do that, right? I just skip ahead because I have different hobbies. Yeah, I look at the checkbox. I do avoid the cookies, but you know, I think that it just, and this is part of the problem, is that right now we're in this relationship, all of us, where we're forced to constantly make these decisions that we may not really want to make or feel equipped to make. That even if we had a ChatGPT or Claude read the terms and conditions, that bot might not tell us the thing that we care about. We're not, it's not always clear, not only just error, but what is important to a bot may not be important to us and vice versa. Right. So I think, making us do all the work, I think, is part of the problem, is that a lot of times people will give you advice on how to do things differently, but I actually want, I want people to actually, as Alejandra was calling out before, like, our government representatives need to be out there making policies to protect us from these individual level decisions that, I mean, can you imagine if every time you had to consent to your car's company when you drove a car? Like, that's not happening, although there is data collection happening, right, every time you get into a car. So what I think is important is the model that it's being driven by individual decisions when it shouldn't be. Government should be in there, as you said, protecting public interest.
And this takes us back to enforcement of our regulations. If we look at the European model, where they actually have penalties for violations with their data privacy regulations, here in Canada, we don't have fines. Companies often find deceptive ways of collecting data, using data, sharing data, and find new and more interesting ways of hiding things or making things overly complex so that the user, to your point, can't make an informed decision. If we don't modernize our regulations, there's no penalty. A slap on the wrist isn't going to do it anymore.
That's right. And also following up with Stacy's point, like, in order to use any of those LLMs to go over the terms and conditions, you'd probably need like an ethical framework to know what to look for. Right. And the average person probably doesn't have one at hand. Yeah. Sorry, I'll try not to divert from the questions.
No, that's a good question. Please do.
Good. I'm always excited to moderate because then I can ask my own questions, But what's the biggest gap between what companies promise about data protection and what actually happens when systems get breached or compromised? I think, Benifa, you can lead this one.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to build on something Wendy said earlier, and it comes down to our ecosystems of how data is processed. No organization is like standing in isolation when it comes to how data is managed. Every organization, whether you are government, public sector, private sector, not-for-profit, it doesn't matter. Everybody uses an ecosystem that relies on other organizations as sub-processors for that information. So whenever we are engaging with these companies, as part of the acceptance of the terms of use, the privacy policy, we are accepting to having our information processed by these sub-processors. Unfortunately, and I've seen this time and time again as I'm working with organizations, there is zero to little oversight of how the sub-processors within the ecosystem are processing that personal information. So what does this mean when it comes to breaches? It means that if I am the company who is engaging with the end user, I have that agreement with you. I have that responsibility to protect your information. But I have now engaged with 10, 15, 20 other companies to also help me process your information. I have a contract with that company. In most cases, I've come across scenarios where there are no contracts. But in most cases, there is a contract that says, I, as this sub-processor, agree to treat the data the way that you, as the organization, wants me to treat the data. What does that actually mean to anybody? It means absolutely nothing. It means absolutely nothing. There's usually a little clause in there that says you reserve the right to audit their practices. In my umpteen years of working with organizations and their sub-processors and reviewing contracts and agreements, I have yet to come across anybody who's actually taken advantage of these auditing rights to make sure that their sub-processor are processing personal information correctly. So every day we wake up and we see that there's been some other breach. There's nobody in this room who hasn't had their data breached at one point or another. It's most likely just that you haven't been notified, but the reality is your data has been breached. And
Isn't
it's
there
usually
a site
because
to check? There's a
yes,
site
you
to
can
right?
check, absolutely. So you can check that online to see where your data has been impacted as well. But the reality is all these breaches are happening because no one is actually looking at their ecosystems. If I have the relationship with you, it's my responsibility to make sure that everybody in my pipeline is treating your data the way that I'm supposed to treat that data. I need to be doing more than just having a contract. I actually need to audit. I need to make sure that you have the right policies, procedures, governance, all the right checkpoints in place. Otherwise, I shouldn't even be doing business with you, and you should never have access to the data that I'm in control of. But again, none of that's happening across the entire ecosystem. So we get into business with these organizations, but we don't really understand how the data is being managed all across, and unfortunately, it's not meeting the current risk factor that exists.
And I mean, I'll just probably add again, it should be a government problem to solve, where they do need to create an auditing system where, you kind of streamline it and you have to standardize these things. It shouldn't be different in Ontario as it is in other provinces. We see that with healthcare and our data, and you can't access certain things in another province with your health data. And so too much of the onus, again, is on the end user, which is really problematic, kind of making the consumers or the individual users do the work as these corporations make more and more profits, which is kind of really disheartening. And so I also want to encourage everyone, again, because we all have a role to play in this, is to reach out to your elected officials. We have to have these dialogues and let your 3 levels of government know what you're concerned about as it pertains to how artificial intelligence is being used or what's happening with your data. When you hear of these breaches, if we don't speak up about it and they're in the legislature debating all these other issues, our issues never really get to the forefront because there's bigger corporations that make sure that their issues get to the forefront of what's happening in the legislature as bills are being shaped. So, there's also a role that we can play, but the sad part is that, again, it puts the work on us. We do need to have elected officials that are really in office for the best interests of the people, where they got to go out of their way to make sure they're doing, town halls, coming to events like these, to really document and understand what are the gaps, what are the issues, what can we do from a regulatory standpoint, so there isn't so much work on those of the people who are trying to advocate for best practices. And so these are it's a huge challenge. It's hard to solve in this room, but these are some of the things that I hope we can all be thinking about.
I think one of the things that makes it tough is that as human as the data are, as much as they describe what we do and how important they are in terms of thinking about our involvement in the system, of whether we're talking about AI or just big tech in general, I think this part has been really underplayed. I think the data tend to get ignored. Like Monifa, you just said, we tend to focus either on the big players, right? What is Google doing? What is Amazon doing? What is Meta doing? Or we're thinking, oh, well, once the data are out there, that's it. Government officials don't think about data in the way that I would think the folks in this room are emphasizing, which is that, if you think about a couple of just cases outside of Canada. So the European Union has a Digital Markets Act. Okay, this is one of their suite of regulatory mechanisms to try to rein in big tech. One of the things that the DMA, the Digital Markets Act, does is it forces the big players, the Amazon, Googles, Metas of the world, of Europe, European presence, to share the data they collect with other companies so that there's a level playing field. It's not about no data collection, right? This is, you need to share data. The other case I want to talk about is US versus Google, right? Google was found to be in violation of the Sherman Act. It is a monopolist in search. One of the things that the judge decided, besides not taking Chrome away from Google, a monopolist, is telling Google to lessen its monopoly by sharing data with other companies. And so this is what I mean when we say, when we downplay the importance of data, even though it is the very most human part of AI, is that we tend to think, oh, the data, well, how do we fix these problems? We just got to spread it around. We got to spread the data around. And instead of thinking, maybe the data ought not even be used or collected or or thought about in this more disposable way that we've come so used to thinking about it as.
My next question, when I wrote it before, I don't like the way it was written, so I'm gonna re-say it. I don't know if you guys are gonna check it. But the original question was, how do we make sure AI gets the data it needs to improve without making things worse for communities that are already at risk? I'm not going to say this is my personal opinion, but maybe we don't want AI to get the data that it needs in order to improve. So I'll change the question to, how can communities that are already at risk, how can they better interact with AI systems that would better protect their data and sometimes their sovereignty?
That's a deep question, Shauna.
I'm switching it on the fly.
It's not the same question at all.
Who wants to tackle
Sorry.
that one first? I don't know if I'm ready for it. I need to let it marinate. Like,
So I'll say this. I think when we look at underrepresented and marginalized communities, we have the opportunity to rethink how technology is interfacing with those groups. And all the things that are at risk when we think about AI and AI integration, they're at risk now. The difference is that the impact will be exponential based on AI technology. We, however, have an opportunity, I think, to solve for some of those problems. And I mean, we were talking about this right before the panel when we look at the fact that there is now an AI task force, there is this consultation that's open. The task force is not representative of all Canadians. So it's not addressing a key issue. A key issue is making sure that the technology and the regulations that are going to be shaping that technology think about the ethics, think about the biases, think about how to make sure that it's being implemented in a way that is safe and effective for everyone. You can't do that if you don't have everyone at the table. So the example I often think of is when we look at hiring. Hiring is, in its current state, a very biased, it's just biased. Whether it's affinity bias or, hey, we went to the same school, or, oh, you're so-and-so's nephew, or you are of the ethnicity that, I think of when I think of this role. It is biased in its current state. The technology, when we think about how AI is being used in that space, if it's being trained on inaccurate data, or the data that already exists in the biased workspace, or the algorithm has been trained by someone who is imposing their biases on that algorithm, it doesn't fix the problem. It makes the problem worse. The technology is just technology. It will do what we want it to do. So the question is, how do we make sure that it's doing the thing that is beneficial for community at large? How do we make sure that we are building it in a way that really contemplates impacts? It shouldn't be a set and forget anything. We need to make sure that we are constantly going back to it, testing it, understanding the impacts, really making sure that we're bringing everyone to the table for those conversations so we understand how is it working in the real world, and is it working at all? And if it's not, then how do we fix it? I think it's an opportunity for us to make sure that we're having those conversations as opposed to, because the reality is it's happening. We cannot put AI back in the box, it's here. So how do we make sure that it works?
yeah,
Go
okay,
ahead.
sure. Okay,
Okay, yeah.
I'll just add, and so part of it is also awareness of its impact, right? So there's some people, because of their ethnicity, their income level, their abilities, right? They're going to have a higher level of harm than, people who are able. And so one example that I would give, and it kind of makes it difficult to say that we have choice in this, because it's like, if I want to board a plane, I need to board my flight. I booked my ticket. I'm here at the airport. Then you're going to tell me I need to go through facial recognition to now access this plane. The facial recognition has been proven through research to be biased towards people with skin tone like mine, with darker skin tone. And so now I'm at risk of being flagged, of being misidentified as somebody who has a criminal record because it's actually matching it against these criminal databases. And so there's been so many cases, especially in the States, because they do a lot of better documentation to some extent of like race-based issues. They have examples, especially of people from the Black community being falsely arrested because facial recognition is in the community center and, you know, somebody's image matched a criminal, and then kids have been impacted by this. Like, the cases are dire, right? But if it's not happening to you, it's not going to be an urgency. So we also need to be aware of the harms that AI is causing on other people that may not look the same, because there's varying degrees of this harm, right? So now you're going to be impacting how people freely move, because you're now putting in these kind of surveillance, these almost weaponizing the technology to make it difficult for you to just freely do something. And this is not just with people with darker skin. There's a lot of research that talks about also the Asian community, the elderly, and children, right? And then you're taking people's biometrics without their consent at these airports. They say it's optional now, right? So it is optional. But we have to ask those critical questions like, okay, so where's this stored? How long is it stored? What is the company that has access to this? Can I opt out? Like, these are the things that as a lobbyist I am trying to lobby for, find opportunities to lobby for, where it's okay if you want to have your technology in society, but there should be options to opt out of things. There should be options to just like still be able to access essential services, because we don't have time to wait for everybody to be data literate. We don't have time to wait for the technology to be fixed so that it works for everybody. So there should be those options, just so that we feel like we have some more autonomy, because I feel like we're building this digital prison where we don't have the autonomy to choose what we want to not access it. It's like you have to go through technology. We're not thinking about people who don't have smartphones, who can't afford the internet. There's also an economic divide, an economic angle that, unfortunately, because of who's dominating the narrative, they're not thinking about it from that perspective because they may not have that lived experience. So that's the concerns that I have with it.
Yeah, I love the way you put that. But I would, okay, instead of opting, I actually want to be able to opt in. Okay, because when you're at the airport, like, and I've been on these flights. Am I going to be that guy who's like, hey, wait a minute, I don't want to go through that because I study this for a living, so like I don't want to do that. And also, where are the data being stored? Like, you can't do that in that situation. Everyone's trying to get on the plane. And so I think that puts, again, the onus on individuals to be the sand in the wheels of the machine. And I think that just kind of hearing what both of you said, I think the thing that occurs to me is that we need to be able to decide when it's an appropriate situation to use the AI. And I feel like now everybody's saying, the government's saying, corporations have been saying, AI will make everything better. But I don't know that it does. I mean, you have great examples. We have examples all the time where it actually creates bad outcomes, not just for marginalized communities, but for everybody, right? Like, people are losing jobs left and right now because everyone's so excited about LLMs. But especially in marginalized communities, you have people who aren't able to speak out in the same way. And we know from history that marginalized communities are the testing ground for all kinds of these technologies, right? So refugees, immigrants are always the first to receive these kinds of technologies. They're coming in to a different country. They have really no standing, you know, oftentimes, especially in the case of refugees. So I just think, you know, like the community, when we think about that, it's got to be, I think we have a chance to be more deliberate about the way that we use these technologies in ways that maybe others who are, you know, the first users might not have been. There are good ways to use AI. One of the good ways that I've read about recently that I'm super excited about is AI sorting your recycling for you instead of you sorting recycling. I think that's kind of a good use of AI, right? And it doesn't really involve human data in the way that other sorting mechanisms might.
You all did great with my question that came out left field. I love that. So I actually made a data mistake a few months ago. So I'm a business owner, and my money comes in chunks. So one day my bank account looks real juicy, and some other days there's lint in there. Okay, so the banks don't really like me that much. So I deal off of cash. There is this one loan provider that they were like, oh, we're just gonna check what your cash flow looks like and then we'll provide you with a loan. And I was like, yeah, that works for me right now. So I clicked yes. Didn't read nothing, okay? And then the other day I was like, oh, let me read and see what's in here. It's not that they just give you the loan, they actually have continuous monitoring of your bank accounts. Yes, so it's not just that they're giving like loans to help you bridge, like it's probably a data company at its core. When we do end up in situations like that, like who has accountability for that? Because a normal bank could never just be continuously monitoring your account because of a loan. Like maybe if you're with the bank, but I feel like that's kind of an overreach, especially if you're paying. So
There's all kinds of overreach, Kishana. Like, the
yeah,
overreach
sorry.
is beyond.
I was like, I should have read this. I know better, but I didn't.
Next time you can have Munifa read it for you for fun.
I just want to add to that because I learned something very new that I thought I knew all about credit and everything I need to know. So I was at an event, and someone in banking, I won't name which bank, they said, how many of you know about the BNI score? Nobody. Like, nobody. There was another banker whose hand was like, but the rest of us were like, BNI? We know about the credit score. So apparently this BNI score is something that these credit unions and these lenders use in the background. We don't have access to it. It's a range from like 1 to 999. There's a range. And it's looking at your use of credit. Are you asking for more credit? But are you using credit to pay off other credit? Like some people in the community use the term robbing Peter to pay Paul. But that actually can hinder your chances of getting more credit if you need credit for a business, you want to buy a house and things like that. But this is the data they're collecting apparently in the background in addition to our credit score to determine our risk factor of filing for bankruptcy in a certain number of months. There's all these predictive tools. So I'm thinking to myself, now imagine when they use AI for that, where you can't have a conversation with a banker to maybe explain your situation, where they use the human judgment that they could use to kind of make those inceptions because they're digitizing it with these like preset things where it's like all these factors that have to look the same for everybody regardless of their circumstance. So it's interesting that you raise that because for me, when I heard about that, I was like, I didn't know about that. And I thought I was financially literate enough. And I just learned about that a couple months ago. Right? So there's still so much more work for us to do and things for us to be aware of, but we should actually have right to access that code. Like I'd like to know what my code is, right? In terms of how lenders are really arriving at who gets qualified for a loan or a mortgage and things like that.
I tell everybody that I can and every chance that I get that you are the product. You are always the product. There is a data set about everything that you do. Every digital interaction you have forms some kind of profile. That's either your individual profile or a group profile or a community profile about you. But in this digital age, we are the product. Always.
And everyone's a data company.
Everyone is a data company. You are the product.
Yeah.
Especially when things are free, you are the product.
Or super subsidized, right? Like your TVs are not being, you're not buying a TV, you're buying a data collection device, right?
But think about it. If you anything smart you have, you are the product. Like you are not that smart. You are the product. The fridge is connected to your smartphone. It's connected to your thermostat. It's connected to your water heater. Like everything about you it's all being digitized and you are the product.
And also, like, it's not just about you. Like, the next presentation is going to be about Ring doorbell, right? It's also the choices that other people have made will affect you, and you currently don't have a way to actually consent or unconsent from that. Yeah.
Everything free but the library, okay? The library is free and that's okay. So US company Clearview AI scraped over 50 billion facial images from Facebook, Instagram, and other social media without permission, including millions of Canadians. They built a searchable facial recognition database and sold it to law enforcement and private companies worldwide. So your face might be in there if you ever posted a photo online. So privacy commissioners across Canada investigated and found that Clearview broke the law. In BC, Alberta, and Quebec, privacy commissioners can force companies to stop. They can take them to court and make them delete the data. They told Clearview to stop collecting Canadian data and delete what they had. Clearview refused and fought back for 4 years, and courts finally ruled in favor of the commissioners in 2024, 2025. But in Ontario and the rest of Canada, the Federal Privacy Commissioner can only investigate and make recommendations. So they have no power to make companies comply. So if you're in Toronto versus versus Vancouver, you get very different levels of protection from the same privacy violation. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is what my research says. So when AI systems violate our privacy, what should actual accountability look like? And I think, Manifa, you talked about fines.
There needs to be real accountability, and there needs to be some type of penalty. The reality is, and you see this especially in Canada, so the definition of publicly available versus public information, they are two different things. Just because something exists in the public space does not make it personal information, and it does not make it publicly available for additional use in a commercial setting. So for example, just because my name is on Facebook or some kind of social media platform, it doesn't mean that some company can just come along and scrape that data and start monetizing that information. Simply because it exists in the public space does not make it publicly available. But again, at the federal level here in Canada, we do not have any actual enforcement. There is no penalty. I can't tell you how many companies I speak with on a regular basis where I'm educating them on the fact that publicly available and public data are not the same things. You cannot just go around scraping people's data. You do not have their consent. You do not have their permission. And again, with our laws the way that they currently exist, it is offside. You should not be doing this. But so many people don't know, or they are being willfully ignorant of that fact because there are no penalties. So yes, our commissioner can put out guidelines and recommendations, but there are no penalties. And until there are significant penalties like what exists in the EU or in certain states such as California, there's going to be no change in behavior because companies are going to do what they're going to do because they think about the bottom line. So we need our regulations and our government to take the stance that what's in the public interest and in the good of the community is what is more important than the bottom line of these organizations.
But I should, this is the problem too, is that not only, there are laws, but the way they work is often you have to complain. There's a complainant, right? So you have to be aware of this, and you have to have the resources, which is not just about money, it's about emotional investment. And time. Right, and time, exactly. And knowing that you're fighting a very large corporation often, or a corporation with at least a lot more money than many of us have. And in the case of Clearview, it's about your face, right? Which is a very personal thing. And when I talk about this case, because this has been a big case, it's been one that also strikes very close to home to many people. When we talk about AI, we can mess with our credit scores maybe and, our shopping patterns, but your face, like that is something that many people get very spooked by for good reason. And so it's not just that it's about privacy. I think that's really where our laws are. That's where a lot of laws are, right? Is that facial recognition technology is a violation of your privacy. But it's not just that, right? I mean, in fact, I would say that your face is a very social device. Like right now, we're all looking at each other. I'm not keeping my face private. So how do we think about that when the face becomes a data set? It's more than privacy. And if we keep saying this is a privacy issue, this is a privacy issue, I think in our society, as in many societies, privacy means a certain thing. It means keeping people out. But how do you, I think this is a great example because it's about social media scraping. People post on social media all the time. They post their faces everywhere. But it's a different thing when someone else comes along and uses it without your consent or permission and monetizes it, right? And that's the big thing. So what happens if they don't monetize? We don't have an answer for that right now.
And it's also without your knowledge, right? Just to add upon it. And of course, they're scraping all kinds of copyrighted information. There's a lot of lawsuits with obviously news media companies against how they're just scraping everything, trying to get books. It's a bit bananas. But one of the things that I'm exploring, and I have yet to find the right tools. So one of the things I've been researching just on my own is how blockchain technology can be used to prevent that. I came across a couple companies that are leading in that way where they assign it's almost like an NFT. They do it in music. So when you publish a song, there's a number that's assigned to it. So when your music is uploaded through a distribution channel, whether somebody shares it on WhatsApp or TikTok, you're actually getting paid your royalties, right? But you have to do the right registrations to get your royalties collected internationally and, of course, through North America. So there's channels for that in music. So I'm researching to see, is there going to be a tech developer that could figure out before, as the scraping is happening, like there's some kind of notification that we can get, I don't know, so we can get compensated. Like we should be getting paid for this. It's not like these companies aren't making money. And so I noticed there is some talk and like research. I've seen like an app and I'm testing things to see what would be relevant for myself that I could add protections to, because there's ways to like on the back end to protect your data. So for example, on one of my personal websites, on the back end, and I'm not a coder, but it's very simple to figure this out, I can put which websites my links can't be shared on, right? I can put that on the back end, meaning traffic will be driven to my website, you watch it on my website. So it'd be good if there is a tech solution to kind of prevent this like free-for-all scraping and nobody's getting notified. And I'm hopeful that there will be, because the fact that I found companies that are somewhat working on it, exploring blockchain to see how we can find somewhat of a happy medium, because I don't think the regulators will keep up with this. I don't think the regulation will come fast enough. So there might need to be a tech solution to this problem. And so I'm exploring and waiting to see what could come up. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just quickly add to Wendy's point about like really trying to take the onus off the individual. When we were looking at C27, which was the last version of privacy reform, one of the things was to ensure that the commissioner actually had the ability to proactively investigate. To your point, right now, everything is reactive. If somebody doesn't complain about it, they have no authority or jurisdiction to actually go out and investigate. So hopefully with whatever version of privacy reform we get this time around, they bring that back to ensure that the commissioner can proactively investigate when they identify things that are offside.
I think it's very hard to enforce anything without any form of like penalties, right? It sounds like a recommendation. It sounds like a recommendation. And if these companies have a lot of money, they'll just pay the fine. And
It's the cost
they don't
of
even
doing
need to pay a
business.
fine. They just need to read the memo. Like it just doesn't.
I can say this as, I spent many years working in private sector, and I know for a fact it is simply the cost of doing business. We look at the CASL legislation, there are fines with CASL, and, when I'm having conversations about what's on-site or what's off-site with executives, they say, okay, well, what's the potential penalty? You explain what that could be, and you have to bring precedent of what's been charged already in terms of what those AMPs have been, those administrative monetary penalties. And they look at it and they're like, okay, well, if the worst that I'm going to have to pay is maybe $250,000, but I execute this and it could bring me this potential revenue, it's the cost of doing business, right? So the penalties do have to be significant and they have to be real.
On a Saturday. So I could speak with the three of you for the rest of the day, but I am at time. If someone here wanted to learn how to better protect their data, what is one thing that you would recommend?
I would definitely recommend be more, I guess, self-aware and conscious of what you post online, and in terms of like, don't be too personal. If you're taking photos, you can, I guess, remove the location as you're taking the photo so they can't pinpoint where you are. If you're about to travel, like, don't do that build up to show where you're gonna travel and things like that. Maybe wait till after, because again, you're putting yourself at risk of all types of harms that could happen. You're allowing these social media companies to have so much information about you that they can create a profile that could almost determine what your political leanings would be just on your likes and your comments and your interactions. Those things are creating this profile about us. And we see what's happening to the south of the border, where now there are going to be, unfortunately, government consequences for having a different political view. So we need to be mindful of the wave of what's happening there and how that could show up here. So just be a bit more aware of the kind of digital footprint that you're creating about yourself online.
Yeah, and to this point, I think it is very hard to go on a complete detox of the digital. I mean, I actually think it's quite impossible unless you choose a very specific type of life that does not have a digitization component at all or an automation component. So no credit cards, no computers, no smartphones, right? So that's a lot. For a lot of people, that's impossible. But I think that, I was saying earlier, to be more contemplative, to be more deliberate about your use of these technologies. So you can't avoid everything. Try to avoid some of it if you can, but at the same time, know that this is the way the system is built. It's not about whether you're doing something right or wrong. It's about the fact that our systems are increasingly digitized. There is an undervaluing of data. There is an overvaluing, at least from my view, of AI systems and automation. And so knowing that, and I think building really on what Stacey and Munifa have said, was just like be aware and be active, but also, be okay with the fact that you do need a smartphone. We all three of us are carrying smartphones with our notes because we had carefully prepared for Kishana, right?
So I can't stress the importance of passwords and multi-factor authentication. I stress this to my best friend all the time. Stop using the same password for everything. The name of your dog, the name of your cat, the name of your children, and adding the number 123 does not make it a secure password. So do not use the same passwords for everything. If we look at the case of 23andMe when they had their data breach, it's because they used credential stuffing. So they took passwords that had been compromised in a completely separate data breach and just kept trying them at the 23andMe accounts, and the ones that were breached are the ones where people had used like an existing password from someplace else. So have good password hygiene. I know how annoying it is. It is, there's a password for everything. It's incredibly frustrating, and I'm the first person to put my hand up and say how annoying it is, but I understand how important it is. So have good password hygiene, use different passwords for things. Think about complex passwords that have letters, numbers, and characters whenever possible. Try to change them at least annually, if not more frequently than that, and always set up multi-factor authentication whenever possible, so it either has to send you a text code or an email or something like that. Just make it harder for hackers or bad actors to gain access to your information. Being criminals is their full-time job. It is what they do all day, every day, is trying to get access to your information, because then they can use that for other harms and other purposes. So I can't stress that piece enough.
Great tips.